What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm your host today, Mike Tagliere, and it appears that Bobby was simply too depressed about Blake Bortles being benched that he could not make it to the show. In reality, Bobby is just a bit under the weather today, but he should be back for Wednesday's sit-start show that we'll be doing. But no worries. To fill in, we've got one of the most accurate experts in Fantasy Pros history on the show. theScore's Justin Boone. You can find him on Twitter at Justin Boone. You can find myself at Mike Tagliere NFL. Justin, what is going on after this nightmare of a Week 7 of fantasy football that we just had?
It was absolutely bizarre, but I feel like there's been a ton of weeks like that this year where just guys are vulturing touchdowns, just insane outcomes that I don't think any of us could have predicted. I appreciate you saying one of the most accurate experts in history. I've never heard it phrased like that before. That's nice. But on weeks like this, it really doesn't do much for me. It doesn't feel like I'm one of the most accurate people at all.
I feel you on that one, man. I even Andy Dalton last night, thinking that he could deliver like a top 5 quarterback performance, and like watching that happen, like unfold right in front of us. And I kind of knew that Andy Dalton would eventually come back down to reality because we know who Andy Dalton is. Like, it's not like it's his 3rd year in the league where he's still developing. Andy Dalton is who Andy Dalton is. You know, losing Tyler Eifert seems to affect the offense more than some people may have thought. But what was one of your biggest takeaways from Week 7? Was there anything that stood out to you that you're like, this was something that I actually do want to take away from a crazy week in fantasy football that, you know, maybe it went a little under the radar because nobody wants to even think about what happened yesterday?
Well, I think one of the most interesting things that come out of this week, and we're getting to the time of the year where this is the case, a lot of rookies are starting to come on, and it's a lot of guys who maybe have been forgotten, guys who were liked in the off season, and maybe now, you know, their owners might have dropped them along the way because they weren't producing over the first month or so. And now we're starting to see some of those names pop up, and I think we're going to talk about a few of them today, so I don't want to spoil it just yet.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's the thing. That's where I'm at with all this. And like, it's weird. Somebody got on my case because basically I said I would spend all of my fab budget on Nick Chubb when Carlos Hyde was traded to the Jaguars. And basically I had so many people being like, this is the worst advice you could give. You're leading your listeners the wrong way. And I'm like, how often is it that you get a chance to get like an every week RB2 for the rest of the season on the waiver wire? Never. So I'm fine spending all your fab budget. I mean, if for some reason somebody wasn't able to grab Nick Chubb, am I fair to say that you would do the same?
100%. And I would try to trade for more fab to throw that in there as well if I could. Like, he is a guy that is 100% going to be a starter in your lineup the rest of the way, and we're going to talk about it. There are some interesting guys in the waiver wire this week, but the further you get into the season, the odds of finding a guy that's going to make a major impact are reduced, and it ends up being guys who, you know, injuries need to strike in order to open up opportunity for players. It's not as many players that are just going to outright come on, especially at the running back position, and steal a job. So having a guy like Chubb have it open up in front of him thanks to a trade, for sure, you were going all in on him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm glad you said that. The fact that you're like, I would try and get additional fab to spend that on him. That's great fantasy advice there.
I don't know how many leagues you can do that, but I'm in at least one league where you can trade your fab dollars, so it is possible.
Yeah, so speaking of rookies and like them coming on, Sony Michel was becoming a legitimate RB1 every single week. And he even started out the game against the Bears really well. He was twisted down awkwardly, and we were worried that it was a really bad knee injury, but news came out before we recorded the show today that Sony Michel's MRA came back and that everything looks to be okay. Are you expecting him to, if he does miss a week or two, do you think the Patriots are going to go out and sign a running back, or do you think that this seems like a no, like you can't lose situation, you just can't hang on to Sony Michel, don't worry too much about it, and everything is going to be fine? Please tell me that everything is going to be fine.
I can't tell you that everything's going to be fine, and especially when something like this comes out, you know, this sort of update from the Patriots, what does it mean? It's not that serious what they're saying. Well, that could mean anything. Not that serious could mean, well, he's not going to miss the rest of the season. He's going to be back for the playoffs, right? Hopefully this is good news and he ends up coming back in a week or two. I think he's going to miss some time. I would 100% not drop him. Do not drop him whatsoever, because when you're talking about a guy like Nick Chubb, you know, some of the rookies, Kerryon Johnson, that are coming on, Sony Michel's the guy that I would want out of all of them. So as long as he's healthy, of course. So let's hope that he's going to get back in time. I think right now it puts James White as a borderline RB1 in all formats. And you're looking at, I don't want to put Kenyon Barner. I have to write our waiver wire article. It's going to go up later today. And I started doing it and I put Kenyon Barner's name in there. It just felt so wrong. I'm like, God, he's not a great talent, but this could be an opportunity for him to have value for a week or two. We'll see here. I don't really know who's out there for them to go get. And it's the Patriots, so who knows? They could bring in somebody off the street and they could deliver. I think there's a chance, though, that Barner ends up just staying there and getting some work, splitting some of the touches with White. So I would actually go out and pick up Barner as a deep league play. I wouldn't go get him and think he's, automatically needs to be in your starting lineup or anything like that. But he's a guy that's going to have to be owned.
Yeah, and well, honestly, like they're playing against the Bills on Monday Night Football this week, so you're gonna get there's going to be some opportunity to use him this week. So I mean, it's something that I'm failing to cope with as well. Like I really don't want to start him in any league if I don't have to. But running backs, there's a lot of people in dire situations right now, so we want to be open to everybody out there. A couple injury updates. Allen Robinson, they're saying is day to day. Don't drop him, guys. A lot of people have been messaging me like, oh, he hasn't been producing, I need to drop him. I'm like, I mean, what are you dropping him for? He was dealing with a groin injury. He was questionable for the game. He was a game time decision, so he didn't even play the final series of the game. Allen Robinson is considered day to day. Just know that he's a little nicked up. They may shut him down for a week. The other two injury notes that I have are Kenny Stills and Kiki QT. It looks like these two are very, very, very questionable for Thursday Night Football. We're having the Dolphins versus the Texans on Thursday night, so that's going to be a shootout. I'm kidding, in case you guys did not get my sarcasm there. And Albert Wilson looks to be out multiple weeks, if not the entire season. So I wanted to at least make you guys aware of that. But on today's show, we're going to be discussing waiver wire additions for week 8, as well as a few hold or drop players that you're likely debating as we speak, and kind of go through this because there's a lot of people are like, well, I want to pick up this player, Mike, but I don't know who to drop. We're going to talk about some of those players who are on the borderline. I have an interesting listener question as well that I want to run by Justin that I'm legitimately interested to see what his take is. But before we do get into that, I'd like to remind you guys that we are giving away an autographed Davante Adams helmet. This thing has a black visor on and everything. It's like the real deal. All you have to do is go to fantasypros.com/contest for the rules. I promise it takes you less than 2 minutes to be entered, and you might just win a free full-size helmet from our friends over at pristineauction.com. They have daily auctions ending nightly with hundreds of lots. They have stuff for every single man cave out there, any team. I promise you, I collect stuff from all 32 teams, so I'm able to go there and look for what I want. Best of all, it's affordable. Most people don't think that they can afford this stuff, but I promise you, my wife would not allow me to take part in collecting helmets if it was too pricey. They currently have a Patrick Mahomes full-size helmet up for auction that might just find its way onto my collection. This is also a time where I might try and sneak a Rob Gronkowski full-size helmet at a discount after he missed this past week. It's currently just $125. I'm going to admit to you guys, I have bid more than that, so don't try and steal it from me. It's quick, it's free to register, free to bid. You only pay when you win, which is obviously the point. When you go to the site, they're going to ask you how you heard about them. Make sure to tell them that Fantasy Pros sent you, so that way we can keep doing giveaways like the Davante Adams signed helmet that we have right now. Go to pristineauction.com. That's PRISTINE auction.com. Okay, Justin, let's talk about the big waiver wire additions this week. Let's start by asking you, which player is number one atop your list? You can go any position here, and we're just going to kind of roll with that. So who do you have atop your waiver wire list in week 8?
Well, it depends, right? Depends on your league, depends who's available, because there are a lot of leagues where guys like Marlon Mack could still be available. He's only owned in 55% of leagues right now, so he would be a guy that I definitely want to go get if he was still out there. But looking at the guys who are going to be available in most leagues, it's Tre'Quan Smith for me. It's Tre'Quan. And I talked about how, the running backs at this point in the year, it takes sort of an injury or something to really open up for a guy, to get some opportunity. And right now, Tre'Quan Smith, he had the injury happen at receiver. He's getting the opportunity. We saw him as the clear number 2 receiver. And one of the things that I like about it is he had that big game on Monday Night Football, and then they went on bye. And I think this is maybe, a bit of a cheat code right now for fantasy owners, because I'm seeing this happen a lot where guys have a good week and then they go on bye. And when everyone goes to set their waiver wire, they look at next week. They don't look at the guys who are on bye, who are going to come back in 2 weeks. And that allowed Tre'Quan to stay out there in a lot of places and to still be out there going into the waiver wire this week. So he is the clear number 2 receiver there. That was great to see. Played on 73% of the snaps. Just dominated Cameron Meredith. Anybody that was worried that Cameron Meredith was going to be the guy to step up and not Tre'Quan, Meredith played on just 18 snaps in that game. And I know that people might look at the box score and say, he had 44 yards, 3 catches. That's not that great. He also nearly caught a touchdown, And it was a super tough matchup with the Ravens. There was also wind in that game that, could slow down the deep passing game a little bit. So he's not going to have to be in a situation that difficult most weeks. And what we saw here with him playing that much, with him actually producing even in a tough matchup, it's extremely, extremely positive to see him as a starter in this offense now. And it makes him, in my mind, a borderline wide receiver 3 moving forward. And consistency won't always be there because we're talking about the Saints passing game. And while the consistency is there in a whole, we've seen that receiving-wise, there tends to be, one guy like Michael Thomas that gets a lot of work. And then across the board with the other guys, different guys pop up as Brees spreads the ball around. But Tre'Quan's going to have the best chance to do that. He's stepping into this Ginn role, and we know Ginn has had some monster games. He's also had some quieter games here and there, but those monster games are going to potentially win you weeks, probably if you had him in your lineup like it did before the bye when you had that big Monday nighter. So I scooped him up as many places as I could before that bye, and you're lucky if he is still out there in your league. I would place a big bid to try to get him on your roster.
Yeah, I love what you said about the whole bye week thing, because a lot of people will pick up players and then it's like that's the first player that they're going to drop because it was kind of like a hopeful. And Tre'Quan Smith it was like a hopeful stash on your bench and you were hoping that he'd get that opportunity. Once we heard that Ted Ginn went to the IR, it was like, oh my God, it's going to happen. Like Tre'Quan Smith is going to be a starting wide receiver for Drew Brees. Michael Thomas is going to continue to see those tough matchups. He's going to get the number one cornerback. And Tre'Quan, the best part about it last week though is like, so the Ravens was a brutal match. You're right. I was curious to see how they used him. Was he going to play on the perimeter like 90% of the time, or were they going to move him around the field? He played, it was 47% of his snaps in the slot. 10 of 21 routes that he ran were out of the slot, and that's really big for his future production because Drew Brees has made a living off hitting big slot receivers. And knowing how the Saints approached the NFL draft this year, trading up in the first round to grab Marcus Davenport, selecting Tre'Quan Smith when they had receivers who were, they were competent as they were, but I felt like they were going for it this year. So to see Smith involved like this heavily right now, it doesn't surprise me. And Tre'Quan, if you guys saw that game, one of the catches he had on the sideline, it was a toe tapping catch where he earned Drew Brees' trust. Like he's going to continue to earn that. I love him as an ad. He's also my number one waiver wire addition. So I'm glad that you and I are on the same page here. So let's just stick at wide receiver then. Let's say that, Tre'Quan Smith is owned in your league. Is someone like Chris Hogan, is he a close number 2 or is it very distant? And how much fab would you spend on Tre'Quan Smith if he was on your waiver wire?
For Tre'Quan, I'm going big for him this week. I'm willing to spend probably 30-40%. I'm looking right now. I tend to do, when I do the waiver wire, I tend to just put a dollar amount. I know a lot of people put a percentage, but for me, if you're looking at the standard $100 start for the year, I am willing to spend, $30-40 to get him if you still have that much. I think, like I said, there are guys who are going to be able to make a big impact. They're not going to be that many left this year, and he is a guy who's going to be able to do it for you. And when we talk about some of these other names, I mean, you mentioned Chris Hogan. I know he started to come on a little bit here. I know he's in that Patriots offense, and, there's going to be opportunity. We haven't seen him do it enough this year. He's come on the last couple weeks, still hasn't had huge games though, and his touchdowns only came in that one game when he had 2 early in the season. There's a lot of competition for targets there now as well. So I'm not as high on Chris Hogan. I think there's some other names when you're looking at, and it's going to be another guy kind of like Tre'Quan, a guy who has a chance at big weeks. A really boom or bust kind of guy is Tyrell Williams, who I would say I like more than Hogan. And we've seen him. I mean, he definitely needs to be rostered, and he's a high ceiling, low floor wide receiver 3. But I just want fantasy owners to know, I mean, he's not going to get a ton of targets. We've seen him produce on low volume the last few weeks here. He's had monster games, 2 games over 100 yards, 236 yards total, had 3 scores over those 2 games combined, but he only saw 4 targets in each of those games, but he caught 7 of those 8 total targets. So I don't want to rain on anybody's parade when it comes to Tyrell Williams. If anybody's going out and seeing that production and going, oh my God, he's immediately a wide receiver 2 for me now. That's not the case. You just have to understand what you're dealing with. It's a very volatile option, but he's a guy that if you're in a matchup where your opponent is projected to crush you maybe, and you need to try to level the playing field, Tyrell Williams is a guy that can help you do that. You sneak him in as your flex or your wide receiver 3, and you hope that he has one of those monster games. He's playing with Phillip Rivers, and Rivers obviously can still get it done. That offense definitely can still produce, especially that passing game as well. So Tyrell Williams is a guy that I would rather have over Hogan, still below Tre'Quan though.
Now, would you spend much fab to get Tyrell Williams, though? So here's the question. He's going on a bye next week. So even if you do pick him up, you're not going to be able to use him for another week. And the concern I have about Tyrell Williams is the fact that he's still yet to see more than 5 targets in a single game this year. Now, he is that one-play receiver where it's like, he's a guy that all he needs is that one catch to make it happen. Tyler Lockett has been making a living off that this year. So, Tyrell Williams, is he someone that you would spend money on to get, or you just kind of like put him in as a waiver wire ad and you kind of hope he lands on your team?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it there. The money is going to be way, way less than a guy like Tre'Quan Smith, who I think not only can do what Tyrell Williams can do, but has upside to be even more potentially. He's so young in his career here. We don't even know what his ceiling totally is yet. Tyrell, I would spend, somewhere between $9, probably maybe even up to $14 if you were really, really desperate, but it would be significantly less, about, half or even less than half of what I'd go after for Tre'Quan.
No, that's fair. And let me ask you a question about Tre'Quan. So let's say that someone wants to add him and that they feel like their team is stacked. They have players on their bench that they're like, man, I don't want to let go of this upside guy. Would you drop someone like Mike Williams for Tre'Quan Smith?
I would at this point. I definitely would. I at this point with Mike Williams, I even think I have him under Tyrell. I even have him under his teammate because we're seeing Tyrell Williams deliver. And Mike Williams was very quiet for a few weeks there before he caught the long touchdown this week. So I don't really trust him in my lineup at this point.
All right. What about someone like, let's say that's someone that's underperforming, like maybe, Robbie Anderson or Taylor Gabriel, who are coming off like very minimal weeks. Would you rather own Tre'Quan Smith than those guys?
Now we're getting a little more interesting. I'd rather have him than Robbie Anderson, just because with Robbie Anderson, another guy that the production hasn't been there this year. We know what he can do. We saw it last season, but he's only popped off once or twice this year. Haven't seen that many big days from him, and he's gone fairly quiet the last few weeks. And with Taylor Gabriel, I really like his opportunity there. That would be a very, very close decision. I think I'm still going with Gabriel for the upside. I know a lot of people are going to be down on him after this week, but I really like where that Bears offense is going, and I think Gabriel's going to be a big part of it. And we know that Allen Robinson is still nursing that injury, so it could open up some opportunities, though it didn't result in that this week. It could open up some opportunities for Gabriel moving forward.
Very cool. Now let's talk about some other wide receivers. I want you to name a few, but one I want you to definitely start with is Courtland Sutton. So news came out legitimately right as we started recording that the Broncos are shopping Demaryius Thomas. It's kind of been like under the radar. I've heard rumblings about this the last couple weeks, so it's finally coming to light, and it's known now that they are shopping Demaryius Thomas because Courtland Sutton was going to be the, once upon a time, they knew he would be taking over for Demaryius, who was going to be cut at the end of the season because his salary in 2019 is like crazy. Emmanuel Sanders is likely gone too. So basically they're looking to make the move to Courtland Sutton. Is he, with that news, is he someone that moves up your waiver wire to in the conversation with someone like Tyrell Williams?
100%. He might be slightly below, but he's right around that range. And I mentioned before all the rookies, there's a bunch of them that are very interesting, and Sutton's one of them. Michael Gallup's another, Christian Kirk as well. Sutton, there was reports that came out, I thought they came out Sunday before the games, that were sort of suggesting that those guys might get traded, that there's a possibility. Teams have been sort of inquiring about Emmanuel Sanders, that Demaryius might get moved. I think that makes Courtland Sutton very, very interesting this week. And it's going to be interesting to see because, like you said, he was brought in to be the future number one. We've really seen him flash this year. Hasn't been consistent, but it's because he hasn't been getting consistent snaps, consistent targets. But he seems to have the ability. It's only going to be a matter of time, I think. I thought we were going to have to wait until next year to see it happen. If a trade happens here, though, before anything even goes down, you have to stash him. I will say that right now. He's a guy that I would put a decent amount of money on. And like I said, he'd be another guy in the $9 to $15 range. But he's a guy that's going to be able to sneak in as a wide receiver 3, maybe even more in this offense. The biggest knock on him at this point is the quarterback play for the Broncos.
Yeah. That's exactly why I wouldn't put him up there with Tre'Quan Smith. And that's the thing is, like, some people are going to be listening and be like, Mike and Justin, the Saints have done this over and over. It's like they've had receivers who have these big games and then they let us down, big games and they let us down. Well, let's talk about wide receiver 3s who are drafted in that range that literally aren't delivering every single week either. Like, you're talking about Will Fuller, who's come off multiple bad weeks. You have Marvin Jones, who's playing third fiddle behind Kenny Golladay and Golden Tate. You have Demaryius Thomas, who, he's got bad quarterback play. He's the number 2 option on his team. He might be traded. Sammy Watkins been up and down. Corey Davis has been a disappointment. You look through these names and you're like, why don't I have Tre'Quan Smith higher? I love this waiver wire because it's kind of like forcing people to leave the old mindset that it's like, oh, he's a wide receiver 3. When people think wide receiver 3, they think, oh, they're an every week wide receiver. That's not true. There's legitimately maybe I don't know, what would you say, 18 to 20 wide receivers who are every week plays. Outside of that, it's like you're dealing with boom bust players anyways, so why not take a chance on someone who's catching passes from maybe the quarterback who's playing better than anyone else in the NFL right now?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at any position, there's just not that many guys. You talk about a position like tight end, outside of the elite guys, you're really just hoping that a guy's going to get either the yards or score a touchdown that week. Wide receivers kind of similar. There are going to be down weeks, and it's kind of like I talked about with Tyrell Williams, and Tre'Quan's kind of the same, like I said, but there's guys that you look at their upside, you look at those big weeks that they're going to have, and they're going to come with some down weeks, but you need to build a roster that's going to be able to survive that, right? Not everyone is going to have an elite receiving core that has Adam Thielen and Antonio Brown and Odell Beckham as your 3 receivers. You need guys that are going to be able to step up any given week, and one of them might go off this week. Well, next week when he has a down week, you need your wide receiver 2 to step up for you. That's how you build a winning roster, unless you're absolutely stacked, and if you are, then fantastic, and you're probably going to win your title. But you need to take the good with the bad with some of those guys, and you need to hope that the good, the highs, are going to be high enough that they're going to win you games.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, here's what I want to do next. For the next wide receivers, I'm going to give you 3 names, and I just want you to rank them in order. Willie Snead, Christian Kirk, Chester Rogers.
Well, that one actually is pretty easy to me. I'm going to go with Christian Kirk first. And we've been talking about it a little bit here. It's just the upside and a little bit the unknown when it comes to him. And more of these rookies, the more we see of them, the more we're starting to find out what their game entails. Kirk is starting to deliver here. He has 57 yards or more in 4 of his last 5 games. He's also getting a new coaching staff on offense here. That brings some hope with it as well. It can't get much worse than it's been. And he was actually delivering under the previous staff. So we would hope with some better play calling here, maybe Kirk could start to do even a little bit more. I'm a little bit worried that Larry Fitzgerald is getting healthy. Looked a little healthier in that last game, and that could reduce Kirk's opportunity. But as the seasons have gone on, Larry seems to have faded the last couple of years, and I think, we'll probably see that again. Maybe he got a little more rest because he was injured the last few weeks, so he wasn't maybe playing as much. But moving forward, I think Kirk's going to be a guy that's just going to get more and more work as the season goes on. And when you're talking about a dynasty league, he's a guy I definitely would want on my roster. The other 2, I'm just not that interested in. I mean, Chester Rogers, now that T.Y. Hilton's back, Chester Rogers isn't even a guy that I would say that I really want to own. Are you that interested in someone like Chester Rogers in that offense? I know that Andrew Luck's passing quite a bit, that he's leading the league in passing attempts. But outside of T.Y. Hilton, they seem to spread the ball around quite a bit. We know Eric Ebron's been getting a lot of looks, and Chester Rogers hasn't been consistent enough for me.
Yeah, no, Rodgers, I mean, he stepped up when T.Y. Hilton was out. Obviously, Ryan Grant missed this past game, and it's like Andrew Luck was running out of targets. And knowing that T.Y. Hilton's back, knowing that Ryan Grant will come back, knowing that, Jack Doyle should return at some point, Marlon Mack is now there to steal some targets, Nyheim Hines is still involved. It's an offense where it's going to be sporadic, and Chester Rogers isn't a talented enough player that demands targets, that you have to target him. So the reason he's been getting targets is because he's that slot receiver. It's the shorter average depth of target, whereas like if Andrew Luck is under pressure, he dumps it down. And that's why Rodgers has some weekly viability during bye weeks if you're in a PPR format. But I'm with you on this, that I don't think Willie Snead or Chester Rogers are players that you necessarily need to spend any fab on. Willie Snead was prime. He had a great matchup this past week against the Saints, and he blew it. He had 7 targets. He dropped 2 of them, caught 3 of them for 23 yards. It was just a mess of a game for him. In an otherwise what's been a very, underrated season, because coming into that game, he had just 1 game with less than 10.4 PPR points. So I'm not willing to give up on him yet. And his matchup this week against Carolina isn't a terrible one against Captain Munnerlyn. But yeah, these are guys that are literally just a buck or two if you really need a receiver just to plug in for a bye week. What about Dante Moncrief and Michael Gallup? Are those guys that you'd have any interest in, or are they just like you'd rather let someone else deal with the headache?
With Moncrief, it's just really difficult because with Moncrief, he's had 3 decent games in his last 4 outings. But in that Jacksonville receiving core, one, we don't even know who's going to be playing quarterback moving forward right now. There's a chance that Bortles stays on the bench here. And in that receiving core, it seems like they're spreading the ball around. Different guys are getting opportunities. We even saw the rookie DJ Chark get more involved this week. So I don't really want to invest in any of them. And when we're talking about all these guys as a whole, and you're mentioning, I didn't even really want to talk about Willie Snead because I'm pretty mad at him. Like you mentioned about, what he did last week. Very, very disappointing. Even had the revenge game narrative and it didn't even come through. But I want receivers that have a chance to be more than just a placeholder, more than just a guy that's going to get me, 10 points. I don't really want that from receivers. I would much rather have a guy in my lineup like a Tre'Quan or a Tyrell Williams or even a Michael Gallup who has the upside to put up a 100-yard game, to score a touchdown or 2. Even if they don't do it every week, I want to know that the possibility is there. Gallup's a guy who could emerge as the Cowboys wide receiver 1 if he hasn't already. I mean, last week, he was a prospect that I liked a lot in the offseason. And last week, I noticed that he led the team in snaps. I thought that was pretty intriguing. And normally when that kind of opportunity shows up, the breakout might not be far behind if the player has talent. I wasn't sure that it was going to be this week, but we saw him go out 81 yards, 3 catches, and he had the touchdown. And he set another career high in snaps this week, played on 85% of the Cowboys snaps. So I know Allen Hurns also had a decent game in that one. The Cowboys passing game might be improving a little bit here. And I think Gallup has the opportunity to emerge as their number 1 receiver. And even though it's a low volume passing attack, I still think that makes him really valuable for fantasy.
No, that's fair. And real quick, one more wide receiver before we move on to running back. What about Davante Parker? I know that it's been a disappointing season. I know that he was benched. I know that his agent has basically said that he was a healthy scratch and they're trying to ruin his value. But now we're looking at a point where Kenny Stills is unlikely to play, where we know that Albert Wilson's going to miss a couple weeks and maybe the year. It's possible that Davante Parker is traded into a better situation. We don't know right now, but there's a lot of unknown here. But he is one of those receivers who you talked about that could become the guy. Should we move Davante Parker as someone that he should be owned in all leagues, or are you more of a wait and see approach with him?
I totally understand anyone that wants to stash him, and I imagine in every league there's going to be at least one owner that's going to want to stash him. I just honestly, after making him a healthy scratch for a couple weeks, having his agent call out the coach, it's hard for me to believe that, all's going to be forgiven and they're just going to drop him back in the starting lineup and let's go from there. It's really hard for me to see that happening. So yes, I would grab him on the possibility that he has to get back into the lineup here with all the injuries and they have no other choice, or in the possibility that he does get moved in the next week or so. I don't know how likely it is that he is going to be able to go from what we're seeing right now, which is a guy that can't stay on the field, constantly dealing with injuries. Obviously, there's something behind the scenes. There seems to be some turmoil, him and the team or him and the coaching staff, to all of a sudden he's going to emerge as the wide receiver 1 that we hoped a couple years ago that he was going to be. And if he does get traded, as good as that probably would be for his real life possibilities, I think moving to another team mid-season, that would be very, very difficult for him to all of a sudden step up and emerge as a difference maker in real life or in fantasy on a new team.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I wanted to ask about him because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there wondering if he should be owned at like the bottom of the roster. And if you have deeper benches, where if you have like 8-man benches, I'm fine with stashing him there. I did drop him in a couple leagues myself because it was just like it got to the point where it's like he's not producing in Miami, and unless he gets traded, people can't just sit there and wait on this. Bye weeks are here; they're in full effect. We had 4 teams on bye this past week. We have 4 teams on bye again this week. So people need players. They need bodies in lineups. And I just don't know if Davante Parker, as you mentioned, is going to be all forgiven and he's going to see 10 targets when he comes out there on Thursday night. So before we move on to running backs, I do want to remind everyone that, being we're all so busy in our day-to-day lives this time of year, it's important for us to do things that we enjoy. For me, reading is one of my passions. Like I truly love reading novels. Eventually one day I want to write one. But at the same time, time is of the essence. So listening to books, what if we all just stopped and listened more? Listening to audiobooks motivates us, inspires us, and even brings us all close together. There's no better place to listen than Audible, because now Audible members get even more exclusive audio fitness programs, audiobooks, Audible originals, and more. Every month, Audible members get 1 credit good for any audiobook they choose, plus 2 Audible originals from a changing selection that they can't get anywhere else. They also get access to audio fitness and health workouts created exclusively for Audible. Plus, the books are yours to keep. With Audible, you can go back and re-listen anytime, even if you cancel your membership. Didn't like your audiobook? Exchange it. No questions asked. My personal favorite book that I recommend you all check out is Karen Slaughter, Triptych, which is a crime thriller. She's one of my favorite authors, and it's available on Audible. Seriously, it's a book that you'll want to go and read, and then you're probably going to want to listen back again. Even better, we have a great offer for you. Start a 30-day trial and your first audiobook is free. Go to audible.com/fantasypros, which is all one word, or text fantasypros to 500-500. Again, that's 500-500. Again, that's Audible, AUDIBLE.com/fantasypros, or text fantasypros to 500-500. All right, so let's move on to the running back position. I feel like wide receiver is a thing that people are going to attack this week, but there's still some names at running back that definitely should be, there's going to be some bidding for. If you guys didn't get to bid on Doug Martin, or if you didn't grab him before the, week 7 started, if he's still on your waiver wire, him and Jalen Richard, I think, are the two top options here. Justin, I could be wrong here. I didn't ask you about this before we started the show, but are these the two top running backs on your list? And if so, which one do you prefer?
Well, as I mentioned, unless there's a guy like Marlon Mack who's still available in your league, yes, they are the top two options. But I say that for a reason. I just don't love this Raiders offense. And, even with Marshawn out, I'm not breaking the bank for either of these guys. We talked about we're getting to the time of year where there aren't a ton of options. And there are going to be a lot of owners that are desperate, whether it's injuries or bye weeks, or maybe they drafted poorly and they just don't have any running backs and they're desperate need. These are the kind of guys that you can bid on. I think it's pretty straightforward. Doug Martin's the guy that I would want in standard. Jalen Richard is the guy that I would want in PPR. I will say that their schedule is pretty good. Over the next month, they get the Colts, the 49ers, the Cardinals. Those are 3 of their next 4 games. And they should be able to keep those games close. Whatever you think about Doug Martin at this point, I don't think he's that great of a player, but those games should be close. That will allow him to at least continue to get some run in those games. So if you're desperate for a short-term option, go ahead and bid on these guys. You have to take your chances on guys like this because likely there isn't going to be anything better out there. So as much as I don't like it, Tags, yes, they are my top 2.
Yeah, Jalen Rashard, I think has gone overlooked in a lot of leagues. I know that because he's only 18.6% owned in Yahoo leagues right now. Rashard has scored at least 11.7 PPR points in 4 of 6 games this year, and that was with Marshawn Lynch in the lineup. I mean, Doug Martin is clearly a downgrade from Marshawn Lynch. This offensive line has not performed the way that people expected it to. The tackle positions are a letdown. Osemele, their Pro Bowl guard, he's been out the last couple weeks, so I don't know if they get him back from bye, but the run game just isn't what they expected it to be. So Rashard has been he's been relied upon a lot more than I think Oakland wanted to, but at the same time, you have to take notice, and I would rather have him than Doug Martin at this point, just because I think he's better built for how this team is going to operate, because the Raiders defense has seemingly gotten worse as the year's gone on. So they have Bruce Irvin just giving up on plays. They just don't have any playmakers on defense right now. That means they aren't going to stop throwing the ball 38 plus times per game. They're 10th in the NFL in pass attempts per game. Rashard is kind of like, the way I view him, he's like a Christian McCaffrey light who's available in most leagues. I mean, Christian McCaffrey hasn't given you the enormous ceiling that I think some people wanted. Jalen Rashard hasn't either, but they've both provided a solid floor in PPR format. So I do think he's worth an ad. What would you spend to get him? Let's say that you are a person that you had Carlos Hyde and you had TJ Yeldon or something like that, and now you're struggling to find running backs to put in your lineup. What would you spend on someone like Jalen Richard in a half PPR format?
I would spend probably $19 in that range, so 20% of your budget. Like I said, I'm not overly excited about them, but Rashard is the guy that I agree with you that I would rather have. And part of it is long-term value. If you're talking just short-term value with those matchups that I mentioned, Doug Martin might have a chance to produce, maybe score a touchdown, get some goal line opportunities. If you're talking long-term, you're looking for somebody to stay in your lineup for later in the season. They're going to have games, the Chargers, the Chiefs, the Steelers. I just don't see any way that the Raiders are going to be able to stay in those games. So they're going to need to throw the ball more, and that is going to lead to Rashard getting more snaps, more work, more receptions. All of that improves his value if you're looking at long-term rest of the way.
Now, here's an interesting question for you. Would you drop TJ Yeldon for Jalen Richard?
Wow, that is a good question. I would try to trade Yeldon at this point because with the uncertainty in Jacksonville's backfield, maybe you can find somebody that's, going to take him and going to buy into that. I don't think that I would. I really don't think that I would. And if you're desperate and you need somebody who's going to be able to step in right away and, you feel like Yeldon obviously is going to fall behind, unless we find something more out about Fournette, no, I don't think I would drop Yeldon. I still think that if things fall his way, he has more upside. I feel like based on the way you're saying it, though, you would go Rashard.
I have Rashard one spot higher in my rest of season rankings, and it's the thing is Yeldon. I don't know why they would have traded for Carlos Hyde. He's the same running back as Leonard Fournette, just the lesser version. TJ Yeldon does some things that neither of them do in the passing game, so his role might be safe. But again, I don't know why they would have traded for Carlos Hyde when they could have just filled in with Yeldon and Jamal Charles for another week or two. I don't think Carlos Hyde is going to make the difference between them and winning and losing last week, or I know he was inactive, or this week. They're going to London. They're going to be playing against the Eagles run defense, so Carlos Hyde's not going to amount to a win there. They're expecting Leonard Fournette to come back after the bye, and I think he will. So what are they really doing here? I don't think Jacksonville knows what they're doing. So I'm going to go with Jalen Rashard here just because I think he's going to provide a better floor, and we just don't know what TJ Yeldon's role is right now.
Well, we started our podcast this week talking about just the dysfunction in Jacksonville, and my co-host David P. Woods, he just mentioned the idea that are we so certain that Fournette is going to be back? I know the reports keep saying that he's going to be back, but his timeline keeps getting backed up, and it begs the question, would they have traded for Hyde if they knew that Fournette was going to come back and be healthy? Maybe they would, and maybe it's just, it boggles everyone's mind, but maybe there's a chance that Fournette ends up missing even more time, or when he comes back, they don't give him the big workload he was getting before.
Yeah, and to be fair, they didn't give up much for Carlos Hyde. They traded a 5th round pick, so it's not much in compensation. They had enough room for the salary to take that on. Hyde can be cut after this year with minimal cap hit, so he was essentially playing on a 1-year deal. So I think this was more like Leonard Fournette is like literally a guy that's going to drag our franchise down if we continue to be without him. So we need an emergency plan. I don't know if they could have waited a little bit longer, but at the same time, I do expect Fournette to be back. I think they just know that he's fragile at this point. Here's a player that I'm really torn on, and I actually thought about putting him over Jalen Richard and Doug Martin because I think that the potential is there for him to be better. Raheem Mostert. He has looked fantastic in his opportunities the last 2 weeks. Alfred Morris is a plotter. He's a 1-2 down back that doesn't do anything in the passing game. Matt Breida hurt himself again. How do you feel about this guy? Is he someone that people should legitimately go out there? Is he a must add at this point, or are you're okay letting someone else in your league grab him?
No, I'm really, really intrigued by him. I'm going to try to get him as many places as I can this week. And we all love the Kyle Shanahan running games. We've seen what Breida can do there. Breida's had some success this season. And then Mostert comes in and he plays he has some of the similar skills that Breida has. And he got a lot of run this week. Breida barely played. He re-aggravated that ankle injury. And it's 2 straight weeks now where we have seen Mostert step up. 87 yards last week, 78 yards this week, caught 4 passes this week too, and you nailed it. Alfred Morris, if Breida misses time here, Alfred Morris is going to get back in the mix, but he does not bring much to the table. And there was some question, even when Jerick McKinnon went down, would it be Morris? Would it be Breida? I was a big fan of Breida. I just didn't see Morris really having anything left in the tank that he was going to be able to offer as far as upside goes. And we've seen that play out. And I think he's got passed again in the lineup here. And Mostert is a guy, probably don't want to start him. I think if you have to, he's going to be maybe a flex play this week. But he's a guy that I want on my lineup because we don't know. Breida is not the biggest guy. And if he continues to deal with these injuries, it's been very impressive. He showed his toughness. He's been able to play through a bunch of injuries the last few weeks. It seems like 2 or 3 times it looked like he suffered season-ending injuries. He just keeps getting back out there. So we might see him back in the lineup this week. It wouldn't shock me. But if he misses time, and even if he doesn't, Mostert seems to be the number 2 there now.
Yeah, that's where I'm at with it. And they're playing the Cardinals this week, who have allowed more running back touchdowns than any other team in the NFL. So yeah, I think that he's someone that I would have no issue. If you're like, I want to grab him instead of Doug Martin, or I want to grab him instead of Jalen Richard, I have no issue with that. And I struggled trying to figure out which one I would rather have, honestly. But if you're looking for one to start this week, I'm going with Mostert. I think that he's the ad here. But talking about some upside players, Ronald Jones. he's someone that he's owned in 15% of leagues. I don't think you're going to need to spend much fab on him if you really want him. We've talked about him on the show, in the past few weeks, and I think that he's someone that's been a bench stash for me. I've loved having him on the bench. There's some people out there who are still throwing out preseason numbers for him. Just stop. Because when you're playing behind a second string offensive line, when the first string offensive line isn't any good, what did you think was going to happen? Ronald Jones is a similar running back in my comparison to someone like Marlon Mack, where he plays on a high scoring offense behind a bad offensive line. The quarterback should open up some holes for him. He's not going to gain consistently 2 or 3 or 4 yards per carry. That's not who he is. He is going to bounce runs outside. He is going to lose yards at times, but he's also going to break some long runs. He was also trusted in the goal line this past week, and he scored the first Bucs rushing touchdown of the year. How do you feel about Ronald Jones? And, like I said, if he's not on a team right now, I don't think you need to spend more than maybe $5 fab on him. But isn't he someone that should be rostered?
Absolutely. I mean, we have to say that Peyton Barber completely fooled us, right? Coming out of that bye week, we thought that Ronald Jones would maybe get more work. He led the team in carries the week before the bye. Come out of the bye, they have an easy matchup against the Falcons, and they go back to Peyton Barber, and he ends up having a good game. And it seemed like, okay, well, with Jameis back and the offense seeming to be, reignited, I guess Barber's going to be the guy here. Well, he fell right back on his face this week. And it's just, a classic Peyton Barber game, 11 carries, 30 yards, right? Just typical Peyton Barber stat line. And he also might have picked up an injury in that game. So we got to keep an eye and monitor him this week as well. But I think with Ronald Jones, I still don't love his talent. I know that you like him, Tags. I still don't think he's the most talented player, but I think in this offense, right now, he's going to give them the best chance, and they need to give him more snaps. So whether Barber's hurt or not, Jones needs to get more involved as we go here. I mean, they invested a second-round pick in him, so what are they waiting for? And I think now is the time you have to get him on your roster. Don't start him, throw him on your bench, and hope. He's a guy you never know. You never know. Even though I don't like the talent, opportunity can sometimes trump all in fantasy, and he could emerge as an impact player down the stretch.
Yeah, for sure. So who would you rather own here, Ronald Jones or Rashad Penny? Rashad Penny was a guy who before the bye week, they traveled to London, and even though he basically didn't register a single touch in the week 5 game, in week 6, he kind of shared the workload with Chris Carson. Carson ended up the game with 14 touches. Penny had 11, and then Mike Davis fell back down to 3rd, and he finished with 7 touches. Is Rashad Penny someone that you would rather roster than Ronald Jones, or would you rather have Jones?
I think Penny is a better player. I think right now, looking at their opportunities, Jones is the guy that I would rather have as the stash play right now, because I think he's much closer to emerging. He could step in and take over that job entirely. We're not seeing much from Peyton Barber, whereas when you're looking at the Seahawks backfield, Chris Carson actually has looked pretty good. Mike Davis actually looked pretty good when he played, and we haven't seen that much from Penny there. So I think he has a tougher road to climb here in order to get to the starting job, whereas Jones, it could be just, a week away here. It could be this week where they finally decide to give him the touches and he could take over that starting role.
Yeah, they spent a first-round pick on him, and whether it was right or wrong, and it was wrong in so many ways, on so many accounts, but at the same time, I think they have to go to him, otherwise someone's going to lose their job. Chris Carson has looked the best, but Rashad Penny did look better against Oakland, so I think he'll see an increased role. I think he's worth owning, especially at a running back position that it's so ugly outside the top-tier running backs, but outside them, it's just like it's matchup dependent. Speaking of matchup dependent, I want you to choose from these 3 running backs. These are like the last remaining options at running back that you might want to own. Chris Ivory, who might be starting for an injured LaShawn McCoy. They're calling it a head injury. I think it was a concussion, but it looked like he also suffered an ankle injury on that play. So who knows if Chris Ivory is going to get the start here. We have LeGarrette Blount, who's stealing goal line touches from everyone and their grandmother. And then you have Kenjon Barner, who mentioned at the top of the show. Which one of these running backs, if someone was truly desperate and wanted to pick up one of them, which one would it be?
It's Ivory. This is another situation. I just don't like it. I mean, I know we're digging through the bottom of the barrel here, and I haven't seen, maybe by the point everyone listens to this, maybe there'll be more news out there on McCoy. But given that injury, given all the trade rumors, Ivory was a guy I was telling people to pick up over the last couple weeks, just because the trade rumors that were floating about LaShawn McCoy. Now you're adding an injury to that. And when you look at it, as much as I don't want to recommend anyone playing a Bills player in fantasy, Ivory posted 106 yards from scrimmage, had 19 touches with McCoy missing most of that game on the weekend. So it's tough to get excited about a Bills player, But Ivory at least seemed a couple times this year, it seems like he's been able to deliver when he's been given opportunities. LeGarrette Blount, I am just begging the Detroit coaching staff to continue to play Kerryon Johnson. We've gone over this. We went over it on our podcast yesterday, and it feels like we're right back where we were a few weeks back when Kerryon Johnson broke 100 yards for the first time. And we said, okay, this has to be the moment, right? This has to be the moment the coaching staff realizes he gives them the best opportunity to win. Continue to play Kerryon Johnson. And what did they do? Dialed his touches right back. Now this week, Theo Riddick's out. Kerryon Johnson steps up again, has an even bigger game, but I'm still not so sure. I want to believe that they are going to realize now, but I'm not 100% sure that he's going to. Either way, I don't really want to trust Blount. He's a touchdown or bust player, so that is an ultimate desperation move there.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's the thing. Is like I don't know what I don't know what to think about Kerryon Johnson. I want to say that he should get more touches, but at the same time, he himself has openly admitted. I talked about on the show last night when we were doing the recap show that Kerryon Johnson himself has come out and said, I don't want to be a workhorse. I shouldn't be a workhorse. So I think it's going to continue like this, but to know that he's running so well on the mixed touches, it's hard to argue with the Detroit coaching staff with the way they're handling him because he is playing well in that role. We always want more and more and more when we see it, but sometimes thrusting someone into a role where they receive more touches, it might affect their efficiency, as we saw with someone like Austin Eckler in London. So there's definitely some concerns there. Let's touch on quarterbacks and tight ends. I don't think this is a week where there's anybody you really need to grab. I mean, Baker Mayfield is owned in more than 40% of leagues now. He's going against Pittsburgh this week. I think that's a good matchup. But what about like the rest of the waiver wire? If you had to choose between someone like Joe Flacco, Derek Carr, in Case Keenum, which way would you go this week?
It is not a good week for streaming quarterbacks at all. And you have to hope. We talked about different ownership percentages. You know, Mitch Trubisky is still out there in a decent amount of leagues. He's owned in more than 50% of leagues at this point, but he is still out there in some. He would be the only guy that you talk about actually grabbing and wanting to hold the rest of the way. Flacco would be the one that would win for me of that group that you just mentioned. The Ravens, I talked earlier about Andrew Luck and the Colts leading the league in passing attempts per game. The Ravens are actually second, which kind of, I think, would surprise a lot of people. Everybody's talked about Luck and how much they're throwing the ball. The Ravens are right behind them. It's 44.6 attempts per game for the Colts, 44.1 for the Ravens. And Flacco only has 11 touchdowns on the season, so the production has definitely not been on par. I'm not trying to compare him to Andrew Luck by any means here. But I like his chances against the Panthers this week. John Brown looks really good. Crabtree is, he's a serviceable second option. Willie Snead talked about it a little bit before, sort of a reliable slot guy. And the tight end core, they're rolling out sort of that committee. I think Hayden Hurst eventually will rise to the top of that. So they have some weapons, and the matchup isn't that bad. The Panthers have given up 2 passing scores per game each of their last 5 outings. And some of those were against guys like Eli Manning and Alex Smith, so not exactly world beaters at all. So Flacco, to me, is a nice streamer. Derek Carr, I mean, we've talked about the Raiders here, but he has one good game on the year. It was that big shootout with the Browns, and he made a ton of mistakes and turned the ball over a bunch in that game too. So, he's got 3 games with multiple interceptions this year. Even in a good matchup with the Colts, I don't want to trust him in my lineup. And Case Keenum, I probably do trust Carr more than I trust Case Keenum at this point, even though Keenum also has a pretty good matchup, though the Chiefs passing defense seems to have gotten a little bit better recently. But, looking at it right now, I think Keenum probably has about the same odds of either having a great game or of completely getting benched this week, right? Like, obviously the fans want Chad Kelly. The fantasy analysts, I think, like us, want Chad Kelly. It would seem crazy to put him out there, but the weapons that they have in Denver, it is still enticing in a game where they're going to have to be throwing. But could you not see a scenario, if last night, what happened with the Bengals, if that happens to the Broncos, I think they pull Keenum. They're going to just pull Keenum 100%, and they're going to put Kelly in there and just see what he can do when they're down, 20 or 30 points or whatever. So I don't want to trust those two. Flacco would be the guy for me of that trio.
And it's crazy. Nobody wants to talk about it, but Arrowhead Stadium has been a tough place to play for opponents. Like going back over the last, I think it's 4 years now, they've allowed a touchdown less per game at home. And like, that's a giant sample size. So whatever it is, players have talked about Arrowhead Stadium being a tough place to play. We saw it with the Bengals last night, and we might see it with the Broncos. So yeah, I'm with you on this one. It's not a great week to be streaming quarterbacks. I guess I would choose Flacco if I had to choose one of them. Over at tight end, CJ Uzomah, he's someone that is it difficult to trust him because like there's so many other options in this passing game. You have AJ Green, you have John Ross back, you have Tyler Boyd, you have Joe Mixon out of the backfield. We have Giovanni Bernard coming back soon. Is Uzomah someone that you feel like is an every week starter? Is he just a streamer along with someone like Ben Watson?
I am willing to treat him like an every week starter. And I did go and pick him up in a couple places. I know the targets weren't there on Sunday night, but he did find the end zone. And from what we've seen with tight ends, outside of the elite guys, if you can get some yards or if you can get a touchdown, the decent options at tight end outside of the elite guys are the guys like the Kyle Rudolphs who can put up, 40, 50, 60 yards. And in the weeks where maybe they don't have as much production yardage wise, they get you that touchdown. They keep you in it. They're just not giving you that 0 or, 1 or 2 points in a game. So, and those are killers when you get those obviously in a fantasy matchup. And I think Uzomah's going to continue to do it. I think he's going to be a borderline tight end 1, even with some of these guys coming back, Greg Olsen back in the lineup, Evan Ingram back in the lineup here. I think he's going to be a borderline tight end 1, probably more of a high-end tight end 2 the rest of the way, but a guy that I'm definitely willing to start most weeks. And he has a great matchup. This week they're going against the Bucs, right? And the Bucs, they're giving up a ton of production to tight ends. They've given up a touchdown to each of the last 4 tight ends they've faced. So a little bit, maybe they're going after the Giants record from last year where the Giants were just giving up a touchdown every week for, I don't even remember what it ended up being, 10, 11, 12 weeks, whatever it ended up being.
Yeah, it was crazy. But yeah, I know that's how the Bucs have been. Any tight end that goes against them, you just play him. You don't think twice about it. And Uzomah is definitely on that list. Ben Watson, I think we all know who he is. He's a streamer. He played well against his former team. He's someone you could plug in when Michael Thomas has a tough matchup, or even Tre'Quan Smith had a tough matchup. The Baltimore cornerbacks were really good. So he's just a matchup dependent play as far as I'm concerned.
I don't know if you want me to breaking news here, Tags. Did you see it? Breaking news. Amari Cooper traded to the Dallas Cowboys.
Am I dreaming?
No, I'm seeing it right now. Amari Cooper traded to the Dallas Cowboys. Crazy.
Oh my God. Oh
wow. Free Amari.
Free Amari. So he goes from one bad offense to another, and that's fine. But I like Dak Prescott as a quarterback so much better than Derek Carr. I think people overrated him after his rookie year, and now they hate him, like legit hate him, even though he had no wide receivers to work with. But if this is true, and it seems like it is, a source tells Josina Anderson that Amari Cooper will be traded to Dallas. This is nuts. I love it. I really do. I'm happy for Amari Cooper. I'm Amari Truther, and this is a new beginning for him. And I really can't wait. Wow.
Right off the bat, I will say I'm going to scale back my Michael Gallup love that I mentioned a little bit earlier. That's definitely going to hold Michael Gallup back a little bit. But as you know, Tags, we're in a dynasty league together, and I have Cooper, and I thought he was just an unbelievably valuable asset, and he really hasn't been the last 2 years here for me. So I'm happy to see him get out of Oakland. A fresh start, I think, is definitely what he needs. And I think there's a good chance that I think people need to change their expectations, though, because I think for a long time we started to look at him like he was going to be the next great wide receiver 1. I don't think that's the case anymore. But at this point, we'd be happy with him just putting up wide receiver 2 numbers. I think that's still in play here. And we talked about the Cowboys receiving game. It has looked a little bit better recently. So I could see a situation. You put him on one side. Hopefully they continue to play Gallup. And then you mix in, Cole Beasley likely, I would assume, is going to be your slot guy there. And we'll see. But this is really, really good news for Cooper and for Cooper owners.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, while we're doing this live, let's talk about what it means for his rest of season value. So let's pretend that this trade has actually gone through and that he's going to be with the team for this coming week. Now, it's really difficult to pick up an offense for a wide receiver. Running backs can kind of just walk in and start, producing. They're handed the ball. How long is it going to take for Amari Cooper to produce in this offense? And what does it mean for his rest of season value? Like, would you rather own Amari Cooper than, let's compare him to guys like Allen Robinson, Will Fuller, and Marvin Jones?
I would still rather have Allen Robinson. I like that Bears offense. Will Fuller is a much more up and down option, and as we talked about, and I think I'm more interested in Cooper than him. I think Cooper has a chance to be a more consistent weapon. And Marvin Jones, we continue to rank Marvin Jones as, a low-end wide receiver 2, a high-end wide receiver 3, just because he has that touchdown upside. But yardage-wise, he just hasn't been getting it done. Cooper will slot into that range for me. I think it's going to take him a couple weeks here before he's completely up to speed, but just giving a quick look at the Cowboys schedule moving forward, they still have some really, really nice matchups here. Tennessee, Philly, The Falcons we know are terrible. Washington, the Saints, likely a shootout there. Maybe we'll have to match up with Marcus Lattimore though. Philly again, and Philly, it's tough to run against them. Normally teams can pass. And looking deep into the fantasy playoffs, Indy and the Buccaneers, those are really, really good matchups. Cooper could swing some things if he's still on your team and if you make it that far in the season.
Wow, man, I'm still taken back by this. I just saw that the details of the trade came out that it's a first round pick. They're trading a first round pick for Amari Cooper.
Wow.
And so good on the Raiders for getting that much in a trade. But it kind of goes to show that the NFL kind of sees things as the Amari truthers do, because Amari Cooper is an extremely talented wide receiver. And if I were drafting today, I would think that he would go in the first round. So the Cowboys expected to have a middle of the first round pick, I would say, at this point in time. So I think it's a good deal for both teams. I think it's good for Cooper to get a fresh start. It's obviously very good for Dak Prescott to get an actual wide receiver on his team.
What do you think about the Raiders now, though? With Nelson, I definitely have not been that into Nelson this season. I know he's popped off a couple times. I think that's probably adds Martavis Bryant to our waiver wire pickups list for receivers, though. He becomes a little bit intriguing. He's had a couple games. I know he had 50-something yards a few weeks back. He had a 90-yard game at one point. What do you think, Tags, the Raiders receiving core now?
Yeah, that's it's interesting. But the thing is Martavis Bryant, who would you drop for him? Let's throw out some names out there. Martavis Bryant, would you drop Quincy Enunwa for him? Would you drop someone like Kenny Stills for him? I don't even know if I'm at that point.
No, I don't think I would.
And that's the thing is so he's still outside my top 60 wide receivers, so I'm not really gonna go crazy for that. Jordy Nelson, I really don't like the way that they've used him in the offense, and knowing that Amari's gone now, he's going to play on the perimeter. Seth Roberts is going to be the slot receiver all the time, which really hurts Jordy. I loved Jordy when he went to the slot. It was a role that they needed to do, but they're not going to be able to anymore because Seth Roberts can't play on the perimeter. So I don't like it for anybody. And honestly, this hurts Derek Carr. I think Jared Cook is the one who I think actually benefits the most from this.
For sure. I totally agree.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to ask you a question. This is a question that someone brought up. They sent me on Twitter, and I really wanted to ask you this question because I thought it was really interesting. I've heard veto questions before, but in the way I feel about vetoes, and I'm sure you do too, because it seems like it's a common theme amongst us analysts, is that we don't like vetoes unless there's obvious collusion, right?
Totally agree. Yep.
Yeah, so you shouldn't veto a trade based on, this makes that team too good, I'm going to veto it. That should never be allowed. I wouldn't join a league where vetoes were allowed. The commissioner should have sole responsibility, and if the commissioner decides it's collusion, obviously that's on them. But here's an interesting scenario. So Austin tells me there was a trade agreed between him and his league commissioner on Friday. The trade was he was giving Sony Michel and Austin Eckler for David Johnson and Jordan Howard. The league rules say that all members have 1 day to veto the trade. Being that David Johnson already played, there was an early Sunday game, it just got jacked up and they were able to vote until voting was able to go until today. So the trade stayed open for vetoing and it didn't get vetoed until today. And now the commissioner is trying to say that it was not, and it's not fair because Sony got hurt. What advice would you have for this situation? Should that trade have gone through even though Sony Michel got hurt?
It should. If the trade was agreed to before, and I don't even think it's that bad of a trade beforehand if they had an issue with it even before the injury, but if it was agreed to beforehand, that is the danger of making a trade with players that have already played that week. That's why I normally won't try to make a trade Sunday during the games or even Monday. I want to wait. I want to see what happens. Let's get to the waiver wire portion. And then you have a better idea of everyone's health. Normally Tuesday, Wednesday, you start to get injury updates because I don't want to leave myself in a situation like that. I'm scared even to leave trades out there. I had a trade out there this weekend, and as soon as the game started, I took that trade off the board because everything could change with one injury, and depending who you're dealing with, I doubt that the person that I was trading with would have, taken the trade after someone got hurt, but you never know, and don't put yourself in that position. But if the trade is agreed to before the week's games and a player gets hurt, it's the equivalent of if you make the trade and the player gets hurt the next week. And we've seen that happen a million times where you give up a package, you go out, you get a great player, and then very next week they blow out their knee or something, and you've lost that asset and all the assets you gave up to get them. So I think it's pretty unfortunate that that league is deciding to veto that deal.
Yeah, no, it's really not fair. And Austin, we're both on your side, buddy, because like if you agreed to this trade, this is why I don't like a veto process, because I feel like trades that are made should go through immediately. The commissioner should have to process them so that there's no collusion. He can clearly see that it wasn't. He was involved in the trade here, so there was no collusion. It's on him. This is clearly on him, and I would be very upset. I would threaten to leave the league if this doesn't get pushed through, because it's not your fault that Sony Michel got hurt. It's not his fault, but you guys did agree to the trade. So I really wanted to address that question because I thought it was unique to the veto process, but I'm glad to hear we agree. That's it for today's show. It turned into a lot more than I thought it would with the Amari Cooper breaking news, and it's going to affect some waiver wires, but obviously, and it's going to affect some rest of the season rankings. But I think the moral of the story here is, like, do we both agree that Amari Cooper is back in, like, maybe high-end wide receiver 3 territory for the rest of the season?
I would say so, yeah. I'll put him right in that range, and I look forward to you coming and making a trade offer for him in that Dynasty League. I'm guessing that'll happen next.
I will not be taken advantage of, but it was fun, dude. I appreciate you hopping on to chat with me. I know it's a busy time of the year. You guys can follow his work on theScore.com as well as Twitter at Justin Boone. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Mike Tagliere NFL. We are going to be back later this week to talk sit and start as well as DFS. Thank you to pristineauction.com and Audible for sponsoring today's show. Thank you, as always, for listening. But until next time, my friends, lights out.
I just wanted you to watch me dissolve.